So as I told you, we are dividing this application into multiple parts. So the first part of the application will be like how we'll be creating a Spring Boot project. So in order to create a Spring Boot project, we have a Spring Initializer, which is a website which allows us in creating the Spring Boot application. So for that, you can just open any one of the browser and just type Spring Initializer over the browser. So you can see the first website over here. So that is starting with start.spring.io. So just click over this website. It will take you to this interface. So in this interface, you will see there is a two parts over the website. So one is where we need to choose all the configurations of your application, and on the right hand side, we can add all the dependencies. So I am choosing a Java language. I can just choose project building tools such like Gradle and Maven. Okay, I'll go with Maven, and I can choose a Spring Boot version. I'll choose the default version itself. So you can see there is something called project metadata, so which holds your project information. So in the group, I'll just give my company name. I'll just give it as Hackify-Tech. Now you can see in the artifact, I'll just give the project name. So we can see here, whenever you update all this information, your package name is automatically created as well. So whenever we are giving a package name, it always should be in a small cases. Okay, there is a description section over here. You can just give a small description. Sample Spring Boot project. Okay, to do project using MySQL. Okay, now you can just choose a packaging over here. Packaging, like you can just get the output in a form of jar or war. Okay, jar stand for Java archive, war stand for web archive. You can choose the Java version. Once this is done, you can see on the right hand side, you will find a dependencies section. You can just click on dependencies. I'll add a dependency called Spring Boot, Spring Web. So this web will add a Tomcat server into your application. Okay, now I'll just click on add dependency. As I told you, we'll be connecting with MySQL database. So you can find a MySQL drivers over here. Okay, this helps us in connecting to the MySQL database. Okay, so I'll click on add dependencies again. I'll choose JPA. So this enables Hibernate queries in your Spring Boot application. So after that, I want my application to be reload whenever I make a changes. So for that, I'll be using one more dependency called Spring Boot DevTools. Okay, so you can see live reload. So once this is done, you can click on the generate button over here. It will start downloading your application. You can just come wherever you want in your PC. I'll just go to the desktop. I'll create a new folder over here. In the new folder section, I'll just give Spring Boot app. I'll just double click and I'll just save the file over here. So you can see a file has been downloaded over here. So once you go here, you can find this. Then right click, you just extract it here. So once you do this, you can find that your file, your Spring Boot project is ready here. Okay. So in the next part, as a second part, we'll see how we can import the Spring Boot project into an IDE. So as of now, we are using an Spring Tool Suite for building a Spring Boot application. So you can see it is already installed into my system over here. I'll just double click on this application. So it will take some time to start the application. So once done, it is asking a workspace. Workspace is something where it will store all your data, all your projects. So I'll just go with the default workspace and I'll click on the launch button. So you can see this is how Spring Tool Suite interface will look. It is similar to Eclipse IDE itself. Now you can see here, this is the path where my project is created, a Spring Boot project, a extracted project. Okay, so I'll just copy the path of this one. I'll come to STS. There is a file option over here. Click on open project from file system. then just paste the path over here. Okay, so it will automatically detect your project. Just click on the finish button. Now the moment you click, you can see the project is being imported, but still it is building the project over here. You can see it here. So now it is downloading all the required dependencies from the internet. Now you can see the project is being imported into your STS. After importing the project, this is how the project will look. So this is the main starting file of your project, where you can find a main method. Okay, where you find the resources, where you will be storing all the configurations files. If you want to write any test cases, you'll be writing it here. All the JDK21 libraries are available. The Maven dependencies are available over here, and some other files. Again, one more very important file is the pom.xml, where you will be adding all the dependencies and all. So you can see we have selected a JPA, a Spring Web, a DevTools, MySQL connector, drivers, and the test. Okay, these are the dependencies added inside our dependencies section. So you can see we have selected the Java 21 version over here, and the small description and the project name is being added over here. Okay, so all the metadata, description, everything will be stored inside your pom.xml. Okay, so this is how you will be importing a Spring Boot project into your IDEs. Okay, so in the third section of this video, we'll be seeing like how we'll be connecting to the database. So in order to connect to the database, you can see you have a to-do application over here. You will find something called a resources package over here. Inside the resources, you will find something called application.properties. You can just double click on this, the file will be opened. So you will find the application name and all. So first thing, in order to connect to the database, we have to install MySQL. Your MySQL server has to be installed in your local system. After installing itself, then you will be able to connect to your database. So in order to connect, we need an URL. So for that URL, you can just type spring dot data source dot URL equal to, you can just type JDBC. Your URL will start something like this colon, you can just type MySQL colon // localhost, and it will be running on the port called 3306. And after that, you can just give your database name as todo underscore database, something like this. So this is nothing but your database name. Okay, so after giving the URL, then you have to give the username. So in order to give the app username, you can just type spring dot data source dot username equal to, so my username is root. You can just give your username as per your database configurations, and also you need to give a password. So you can just copy this, I'll just paste it over here. So instead of username, I'll just change it to password. That's it. So my password is also root, database password, so I'll just give the root. Okay, now I'll just give one more property that will just automatically create and update the database. So you can just give spring jpa dot hibernate dot dll auto equal to, you can just set it to update. So this will automatically start updating your database. So it will start automatically create your database tables as well. So I'll just save the file now. So one more property, so whenever you're making any database changes or creating a table or anything, you want to see the SQL properties over the console. So for that, you can just give one more property called spring dot jpa dot show SQL. You can set it to true. So this property helps us in this property will show the MySQL queries executed in your database or your console. Okay, after giving these file lines, so it will automatically connect to the database. Okay, but before connecting to the database, it will not automatically create a database. So you have to make sure you have to create a database as well. So in order to create a database, you can just come to your search section over here, just type MySQL.
Okay, you will find if the MySQL software server is installed, you will find this command line client. You just click here. You can give your MySQL password, hit enter. Now you can see you're inside your MySQL shell. Okay, so what is my database name? My database name is todo db. So I'll just create a new database. So in order to create a database, we have to write a query. So you can just write create database. I'll just give the same name. So todo underscore db. End with semicolon. So each and every query has to end with semicolon. So once you hit enter, you can see one database has been created. Now you can see if you want to see the created database, then you can just type show database like. I'll just write an regex. So I have multiple databases, so that's why I'm writing a regex. Or you can just use a query called show databases. So I'll just write to do, I'll just write percentage, I'll hit enter. Show database like. Okay, so S was missing here, show databases. You can see a database has been created. Now I want to select this database, so I have to use a query called use todo underscore db. So now I have selected a database. So whatever query I'll be executing, that will be executed inside this database. So now you can see this database is completely empty. If I want to see the tables available into this database, so I can just type show tables. Okay, you can see it is returning an empty set, which means there is no table created or existed. Okay, so this is how you will be connecting to the database. Now in the next part, we'll see how we'll be creating a table into the database using entities. Okay, so as a fourth part of this application, we'll see how we will be creating a tables into our database. So in order to create a table into your into the database from your Spring Boot application, what we can do, we can just come to this folder src main java. Inside that you will find a package called com.hackify-Tech.todo. Just right click on this package, click on new and click on a package. So as to organize the project into proper packages, I'll create one package called model. So model is where we'll be creating all the tables. So click on finish. You can see one package is being created. So I'll just right click, I'll click on new and I'll create a class. So in this class, I want to create something called task. I want to create a table with the name called task. So I'll just create a class with the name called task. I don't want a main method, so I'll just click on the finish button. So you can see one class is being created. I want this class as a table into the database. So I'll just annotate this class name as entity. So entity is coming from your jakarta.persistence.entity packages. Okay. Now Spring Boot will not create a table until and unless we mention a primary key. So in order to mention a primary key, we can just mention private long and id. So this is just a variable now. So in order to make this as primary key, I'll just mention an annotation called @id, which have to be imported from jakarta.persistence again. So the next thing, I want this id to be auto generated, which means like if we are entering a single record, it should keep on incrementing the id. So that's why I'll just write @generated value into the bracket. I'll just mention strategy equal to generated type. I'll just mention it as identity. So if you mention this, it will add one more annotation called auto increment. Okay, so if you add one single row, it will give one id. So if you're adding a second entry, two id, something like that. Then this task will be having a title. So the title will be a sequence of characters. So I'll just make this as private string and title like this. And this will be having a description. So I'll just mention private string description. Okay. Now you can see these are the variables created, but they are not being used. So the you can see there are some errors. It is throwing some warnings over here. So not in use, right? So what I'll do, I'll just quickly generate a getters and setters. Because if I'm creating them as a private variables, I can't access them outside of the class. Okay, so that's why I'll just right click. I'll go to source. There is something called generate getters and setters. I'll click over this. I'll just select all the field and I'll click on generate. So once I do this, you can see these lines of codes will be automatically added. Okay, that's it. Now if you just save this project, now I need to run this. So you can see still my database table. Okay, in the database, there is no table created. Now, if I run this project, right click, run as Spring Boot application. So once I do this, you can see a Spring Boot application will be started on a port called 8080. Okay, so you can see it is started on 8080. You can see that the query is been already displayed over here. Create table task. You can see here because of this property. This property will just print the query inside your console. Now you can see this is creating a table into my database. If I just go to the database and if I just type show tables, you can see one table is being created with a name called task. I want to see the description of a table. So I'll just write describe task. You can see the fields. Let me go to the entity class. Let me come back here. You can see this is the ID created, which is a primary key as well, and it is set to auto increment because of the line number 12. Then we have mentioned one title, which is will be holding a sequence of character, a string data type, so which will in database we call it as varchar, and the description, which is also of type string as well. Okay, so you can see automatically tables are being created into your database. Now let's move to the next part of application. So in this part, we'll see how we will be creating an repositories. So I'll just stop the server here by clicking on this red button, and I'll just close the so I'll just clear the console. Now I just don't want the console over here, so I'll just minimize it. Now, in order to create a repositories, which will be connecting to our databases and which will gives us a predefined queries. So for that, we can just come to the to do package again, right click, new, create a package called dot repo, or you can give repositories as well. Click on the finish button. You can see one package is being created called dot repo. Now over here, right click, new, and make sure you create an interface, not an class. Okay, so whenever we are creating a repositories in Spring Boot, we have to choose an interface section, interfaces. So I'll just choose interface. I'll just give the interface name as task repository, and I'll click on the finish button. So you can see one interface is being created. Now this interface will be extending one more interface. So that interface we call it an JPA interface, JPA repository interface. So extends JPA repository. So this T stand for an entity class. So our entity class, you can see here, it is available here. So I'll just make this as task. And I need to give a ID. ID stand for a primary key, which is our primary key over here. You can see primary key is ID, so which is of type long. So that what I need to mention over here. So task, and I'll just mention a long data type over here. So make sure L is capital. Okay, so task we need to import. So control space over the task. You can see we need to import the task from this package and this class name. So com.hackify.todo.models. You can just double click on this. You can see the task is being imported as well. Some extra P is being added. Now save. Now when you create a repository, automatically it will give you some Hibernate queries over the over this entity class, over this table, like find by id, delete by id, all these will be automatically created. Okay, now once you create a repository, the next part will be defining a controller. So in order to define a controller, what I'll do, I'll just create one more package over here with the name called controllers, controllers. I'll click on the finish button. You can see one controller has been defined over here. So I'll just right click, I'll create a class. The class name I'll give as a task controller, and I click on finish. So whenever you're defining a controller, make sure you annotate this controller class as at the rate rest controller. Okay, so which has to be imported from this package. So now I'll want to give a default path to this, so I'll just import one more, annotate this class with at the rate request mapping, where I'll just give a URL as forward slash API forward slash task, something like this. Now after mentioning default path, now I can just need to do an dependency injection for your repository. So for that, I'll just come back over here. I'll just write at the rate auto wired. Now at the bottom of this, I'll just write private. What is the repository name? The repository name is task repository. So I'll just mention task repository space. I'll just give a variable name as task repo, task repo. Now, once you do this, you need to import the task repository. You can see task repository is mentioned inside this package, and this is the interface. So we need to import that. So I'll just bring my cursor over here, control space. You can see automatically the import has been added. Now, I want to define an API, API for getting the task or creating a task. So for that, I'll just create a simple method with the name public. So I need to create a post method. So I'll just write, I'll be returning a task after creating. I'll just give a method name as create task, open a bracket. So this is a simple method which is returning a task. Okay, I'll just add a return statement to null so the error will go as of now. So I need to import the task from the model as well. So I'll do that. Okay, now whenever we are creating whenever we want to insert a data into the table, we need to accept a data. So that data I'll be accepting as a form of request body. So at the rate, I'll just add an annotation called at the rate request body over here. So what type of request body I want? I want a task request body. So I'll just mention it over here, task, and I'll just write a variable. I'll just give a variable for this. This variable belongs to this task. So task is nothing but a request body. So I'll just change it to body so it will not create a confusion. So I have a repository over here. So I'll just write task repo dot save, and I'll just pass the body over here. Okay, to the save method. So this save method is automatically defined into this task repository. Now I'll just simply annotate this as post mapping, and I'll just give a empty URL. So I've defined the routing here. When I just go to this path, I create a post API, and I'll just hit a call this method. So this method will accept a body. This body will be sent automatically to the repository and it will save the data into the table. Okay, let's test this API. So as you know, in the browser, we can't make an post API. So let me just quickly configure a Swagger. Swagger is an API documentation library. So I'll just go to the internet. I'll just write Swagger Spring Boot 3. You can see Swagger Spring Boot 3. Go to this document, go to this website. Just scroll down a little bit. You will find this documentation, this dependency. You just copy this dependency, come to your project back again, come to your pom.xml. So inside this, you will find a dependencies section, right, where you can see where we have a multiple dependencies. So below this, I'll paste the Swagger dependency. So it is not formatted. So in order to add a proper indentation, just press Ctrl plus Shift plus F arrow key. Done. Okay, now once you save, you can see it start building the project once again. Once I do this, I'll just run the application. Okay, so I'll just right click, new. I'll run this as a Spring Boot application. So again, my Spring Boot, okay, there is some issue. Okay, this issue might come because we need to update the project. So you just right click, go to my one, just click on update project, click on OK. So once you can see again the project is being updated. So I'll just stop, right click, run as Spring Boot application. Perfect. You can see the application has been started on the Tomcat server on the port called 8080. So what I'll do, I'll just go to the browser again over here. Now I'll just type localhost 8080 forward slash swagger UI index.html into the browser. The moment I hit enter, you can see a Swagger documentation is being opened, and you can see your API, one post API is being created, which helps us in creating mm, a task into the database. So you can see when you just expand this, you will find a request body. Okay, so where we have mentioned it over this API in the controller, task controller. Here we have mentioned the request body. So that's why in the API as a request body, it is accepting this object, JSON object. Now if I want to hit this API, I'll just click on try it out. Now whenever you're posting an API, whenever you're creating, so ID is been set to auto increment. You can see here ID is been set to auto increment, so no need to send an ID. So that's why I'll just remove this ID from this object, and I'll just mention task. Okay, so task one, I'll just write homework. Okay, I'll just mention a description. Finish the maths homework, something like this. And I'll click on execute. So before clicking on execute, let me just come back to the database and let me just show that the table is completely empty. So I'll just execute and select query, select star from task. So you can see it is returning me empty data because there is no data into the table. So let me just come back here and let me just click on execute. So the moment I execute, so you can notice that automatically in the response, we're getting a JSON object itself. So the query is being executed successfully. That's why it is returning an 200 message. 200 stands for OK message. And in the response body, you can see it is returning me a JSON data. So I'll just quickly come back here. Let me just check whether the data has been inserted into the database or not. So I'll just type select star from task. So you can see our data is available over here. Okay. So let me just add one more data. So I'll just quickly come back over here again. I'll just change the title, or if you want, you can just quickly refresh this again. So again, you can see the data will be erased. So now I'll just click on try it out. Now I'll just remove the ID again because ID should not be sent. Title, I'll just come back to the title. I'll just mention as call XYZ. Okay. So call xyz and ask for some task. Okay, and I'll click on execute. So the moment I click on execute, you can see one more data has been added into the database. So I'll just quickly come back here, select start from task. You can see a second data entry has been done in your database table. So this is how you can just create a normal post APIs and you can start adding the data into your table. Now you can notice that we don't have any API to get the task from the database. So let's create one get API as well. So in order to create a get API, I'll quickly come back to my IDE again. So you can see there is a post method. Post is for creating a adding a data into the database. So let me quickly create a get API. So I'll just write one method public. I'll write task. I'll write it as get task. I'll just make this as get all task. Okay. So I'll just open a bracket, close a bracket. I'll just return this one. So but this we can see I'm just want to get all the tasks. So the task will be like multiple objects like this. So here you can see here you're getting a single object, but if I'm getting all the datas, it will be an array of data. So that's why I to come back here and I'll just change it to list of task. Okay, so list has to be imported from java.util. So once I do this, you can see still it is throwing an error because there is a return statement missing. So I'll just write return task repo. Task repo is nothing but this repository object. So task repo dot, you can see there is something called find all, which will return the list of tasks. I'll just select this. That's it. Just save the file. So once you save the file, you can see the server is automatically restarted. So this is because of an dev tool dependencies. So now let me quickly go to the browser and let me just refresh this one. So you can see now, okay, you can see there is no get API still listed into our Swagger API documentation. So I'll just quickly go back here. Something I'm missing here, that is a annotation, something like this. But whenever we are getting a data from a database, so we have to write this as get mapping. Okay, so I'll just make this as forward slash because same path I want, and just API method should be get method. So I'll just save it now. Once again, my server will be restarted. So after that, I'll quickly go to the browser. I'll just refresh it once. Now you can see I got one more get API over here. I click on this drop down. I'll click on try it out and I'll click on execute. That's it. You can see you got the data over here. Now also without any help of a tools like Swagger or Postman, I can just directly make a get APIs over your browser directly over here itself. So you can see you got the data over here. So sometimes you might get a data something like this. This data you can see is because of a extension called JSON formatter. Okay. Now next thing, okay, done. We are able to get all the tasks. Now the next thing, we want to delete this task as well. So in order to delete this task, I need to create one more API, a delete API. So all the time, whenever you're deleting a data from a table, you will be deleting based on the ID, based on the primary key. So let me just quickly come back here. Let me create one more API to delete the task. Or okay, let me, so this API will get all the tasks available in your database. Okay, get all the datas, but I want to get a single data. You can see there is a single row as well, right? I want to get a single row. So in order to do that, you can just create one more API public. I want to get a single task because you can see here I'm returning a list of tasks, but I want to get only a single task. So I'll just write task get task, just define a function, open a bracket, close a bracket, and I'll just write here I want to get it based on the parameter. So this is also get URL itself. So I'll just write get mapping, but here I'll just write an ID. So here I'll just mention at the rate path variable of type long, and which will be a ID. Okay, once I do that, I'll just write a return statement, task repo dot, there is a function available called find by ID. You can see find, not find all by ID. I'll just write find by ID. You can see here find by ID. So here I'll just pass this ID over here. Okay, still it is throwing an error that return. Okay, it will return optional. Okay, so sometimes there might be a data with this ID, or if the data is not available and is with specific ID, then it will return a null value. So that's why we have to change it to optional. So I'll just bring a cursor over here and I'll just change it to optional. That's it. I'll just save. Now let it restart once again. So once after restarting, okay, I have done a mistake over here. This ID has to be written in curly brackets. Okay, done. I'll just save it once again. Now I'll quickly go back to the Swagger documentation. I'll just refresh. You can see you're not finding a API where to find a task based on the ID. So I'll just refresh this once. You can see one API, I have found it here. So I'll just click on get task. So I'll just pass. You can see there is a task added, which the ID is one. Finish the maths homework. So I'll just quickly click on try it out. I'll just pass the ID one and I'll click on execute. So the moment I execute, you can see I have found only one single object. Still you can see a API over here. So since this is a get API, I can still make it, I can just hit this API from my browser itself. Okay, now if I just change this URL to 2 and if I hit enter, so you can see 2 second API. So call XYZ. So you can see in the table call XYZ. This is the row which has been fetched as a JSON object. Okay, now let's create one more API for so we have done with post create, get is done, get by ID is done. Let's create delete. So I can just do delete based on the ID itself. So I'll just copy the same thing and I'll paste it. So instead of get mapping, I'll just change it to delete mapping. Okay, so based on ID, so I'll just write instead of get task, I'll write delete task. Okay, so instead of find by ID, I'll just write delete by ID. Okay, you can see delete by ID. Okay, so I'll just save, but still you can see it is throwing an error. Why? Because return type will be void. So I have to change it to void. That's it. So still change the method return type to object. Okay, fine. So you can see it is telling me to change the method type to return type to object. So I'll just change it to object. So let's save. Still there is an error. Okay, it is telling it can't return me the any object. So what I'll do, I'll just change this to string data type, and here I'll just write return. I'll just write data deleted. I'll just see. Okay, you can see the error has been fixed. Or else let me just add the ID as well. Row deleted with, I'll just with ID, I'll mention the ID as well over here, which has been accepted as a parameter. Okay, let me just save. Once I save, you can see it will automatically refresh it once again. which is running on 8080. Let me go back to the browser. Let me go to the Swagger configuration. Let me just refresh it over here. So you can see there is one more API created called delete API. So I want to delete this data, right? So you can see if I do select start from task, you can see I have one row. Okay, the row ID is 1. So I'll just quickly come back here, try it out. I'll click 1 and I'll click on send. The moment I do, you can see row deleted with the ID. So let me just go check it over here. Perfect. Now you can see one data has been deleted. Okay, if I want to delete the second ID object as well, so I'll just pass this to 2 and I'll click on execute. So now you can see all the data has been deleted. Now if I just go and if I just do a select operation over my database, it is still returning me empty data. Okay, now you can also check over the get APIs. You click try it out, execute, you can see it will return you an empty array. Okay, so let me just quickly create one more task. Post, try it out. I'll just remove this. I'll just write by phone. I'll just write by phone from XYZ sale. I'll click on execute. You can see one task is being created with the ID called 3. Okay, so let me just go back. Let me just write select start from task. You can see one task is being created over here. Okay, done. You can see we have done a CRUD operation, but still update is missing. So CRUD stand for create, which is a post API. Okay, R stand for read. You can see get API, get all the datas as well as get by ID. So D stand for delete and U stand for update. So update API is still pending. So in order to create an update API, I'll just quickly go back here. The post API I have here, I'll just quickly copy that. I'll just come back over here and I'll paste. So instead of create task, I'll just change it to update task. Okay, let the request body be same as it is and let the same method be as it is. Okay, so instead of post, I'll change it to put. I'll just need to import the put mapping from the annotations. So here, done. I'll just save this. Let's test the put API. So now in order to update the data, you can see there is this data over here. So if I just do this, let's start from task, you can see ID, phone and some data. So for update, I'll go back again to the Swagger API. I'll just refresh it. You can see there is a put API available here as well. Now I'll just click on this, drop down, I click on try it out. So your ID should match whenever you're updating, your ID should match as it is. Okay, so the title, it is by phone. Let me just keep it as string. So some description, I'll just change it to some description and let me just click on the SCRI. Okay, let me just click on execute. So once I do this, you can see automatically the data is being updated. So if I just go back, you can see earlier it was 3 by phone from XYZ, that's some title. If I just click on the up arrow key, it will take me to the previous executed query and I'll click on enter. So once I do that, you can see the data has been updated as well. Okay, so whenever you pass an ID, it will start updating your data from your existing rows. Okay,